dust rising to the skies, air filled with the sound of laughter, waiting for Mandela, waiting for Mandela.
My people, today I am free. I am free because you never forgot me. The day is coming when we will all be free. Free from hatred, free from fear, free from killing. You are young. You will live to see the day. And if I don't live to see the day, you better believe it. I'll be there. This is my home, and I'm home to stay.
The Republic of South Africa, Africa's ultimate destination by the virtue of its advanced economy. It is a country that has experienced one of the darkest chapters in the civilization of mankind. The year 1948 to 1994 will infamously go down the annals of history as the years that witnessed perhaps the most draconian system of governance ever known to mankind in the modern-day civilization. The policy of Apartheid instituted by the government of Daniel Francois Malone between 1948 to 1994 had its fair share of casualties. It is an era that gave birth to the much renowned leaders in South Africa: Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, and Oliver Tambo. But do you know its makings? This is the Whispers edition on the Apartheid genocide in South Africa.
I shall never lose hope, and my people shall never lose hope. In fact, we expect that the work will go on.
The apartheid system was a system of racial segregation and discrimination in South Africa that lasted from 1948 to 1990. It was a system implemented by the National Party government, which was dominated by the country's white minority population. Under apartheid, the rights and opportunities of non-white South Africans, including the country's black majority, were severely restricted. The origins of apartheid can be traced back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when white settlers in South Africa began to push for greater political and economic control over the country. South Africa, suffice to say, was the meeting point of the Dutch and the British traders. The Dutch defeated the British in the Battle of 1910 and salvaged South Africa from the yoke of British colonialism. The National Party, which was formed in 1914, campaigned on a platform of racial segregation and white supremacy. In 1948, when they got voted into power, they immediately began implementing a series of draconian laws and policies designed to enforce racial segregation and discrimination. One of the key features of apartheid was the forced removal of non-white South Africans from certain areas known as group areas. These areas were designated for specific racial groups, and non-whites were forcibly removed from areas designated for whites. This led to the displacement of millions of people, many of whom were forced to live in overcrowded and under-resourced townships and homelands. Perhaps the most famous township that came under fruition as a result of this draconian policy is the township of Soweto. Apartheid also restricted the rights and opportunities of non-whites in education, employment, and healthcare. Non-whites were denied access to the same quality of education and healthcare as whites, and were also banned from certain jobs and professions. Legends and heroes like Nelson Mandela were forced to get their university education through correspondence and not necessarily availing themselves in respective campuses. The system of apartheid was met with strong resistance from non-white South Africans who organized protests and boycotts to demand equal rights and an end to this racial discrimination. Some of the most significant opposition came from the African National Congress, which is Africa's oldest party, a political party that had been banned by the government in 1960. The ANC and other anti-apartheid organizations also received support from many countries and international organizations which imposed economic sanctions on South Africa in an effort to pressure the government to end apartheid. Some of the most prominent anti-apartheid supporters is Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere of Tanzania, Samora Moses Machel of Mozambique, and Kenneth David Kaunda of Zambia.
The whole of this exercise is an African exercise. This is an African problem. Obviously, we don't have all the means. If we had the means, of course, we would not go outside Africa. We don't have all the means, but nevertheless, it's an African problem, and it's the Africans who have taken this initiative. And clearly, although the countries of the regions are the ones who have met for this problem, we can't envisage a force, basically an African force, seeking assistance from the outside world. We can't envisage a force, an African force that does not have South Africa.
A luta continua! A luta continua! Contra o quê?
In the 1980s, internal and external pressure on the South African government to end the apartheid began to increase. In 1985, President P.W. Botha announced a series of limited reforms, but these were seen as insufficient by anti-apartheid activists. In 1989, President F.D. Klerk came to power and announced that the government will begin serious negotiations to end the apartheid. For this, he won the Nobel Peace Prize alongside Nelson Mandela in 1990.
I wish to put it plainly that the government has taken a firm decision to release Mr. Mandela unconditionally. I am serious about bringing this matter to finality without delay. The government will take a decision soon on the date of his release.
These negotiations led to the release of Nelson Mandela, the leader of the ANC, who had been imprisoned in the notorious Robben Island for 27 years. Mandela was accused of having an underhand tactics in what was seen as an attempt to dethrone the legitimately elected government. Consequently, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. During the Rivonia trial, he would make a speech which would go down the annals of history as one of the best speeches ever.
I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
Mandela, after his release, would work with de Klerk to draft a new constitution that would guarantee equal rights for all South Africans regardless of race. In 1994, the first democratic elections were held in South Africa, with Mandela being elected as the country's first black president. The end of apartheid marked a significant turning point in South African history as the country moved towards a more inclusive and equal society. However, the legacy of apartheid still affects South Africa today, and issues such as poverty, unemployment, and inequality continue to be a major challenges for the country. You see, the apartheid system groomed black African leaders who would later take over the pernicious enterprise. Some of the architects of the apartheid system, such as the famous Gupta brothers, would form a close-knit relationship with members of the African National Congress, most notably Jacob Zuma. By doing this, the system was literally passed over to this new cabal of African leaders who literally took over every single aspect. South Africa continues to battle the issue of unemployment, and it is one of the most unequal, if not the most unequal country on the planet. It is a country that has experienced high number of homicide cases. It is estimated by the World Health Organization that about 5 homicide cases take part in South Africa. This perhaps cements the xenophobic sentiments that have boiled over the past few days. Whether to blame the majority black who are confined in these townships or not is a subject for another day, but what is evident is that the system has left them out completely, and they have had to find their ways of survival. Such ways include conducting homicides, looting and vandalizing, killing fellow Africans from other nationalities whom they believe have come to their country to steal the limited opportunities availed to them.
Fighters, let us not be too local. Let us be international. We are existing in a globe. We do not exist in isolation. Let us stop xenophobia. Let us stop self-hate.
70% of the wealth is controlled by a tiny 30%, with majority of that tiny 30% being the whites. They really never left. South Africa is yet to release a true economic independence over 20 years since it brought about a black majority rule. This is a subject for debate among different academic circles all over the world. Apartheid, the adoption of it actually in the 1960s, saw high rates of massacres, most notably the Sharpeville massacre, which had hundreds of school-going children massacred in broad daylight. This forced the international community to bring up a concerted and strong condemnation in regards to this draconian policy. Most notably, Macmillan Harold, the British Prime Minister of that time, came out strongly opposing this policy, stating that the wind of change was blowing vehemently and every single person must be subservient to it.
Let us be one thing. Let us love our continent. Let us fight for our continent. Let Africa one day realize its own freedom. Let Africa one day stand on its own feet and say, I own my minerals, I own everything that belongs to this continent. Let Africa alone be able to say, enough is enough, away with colonialism, away with the imperialists. Let the unity of African people reign supreme in all of us. We are Africans, and we are not going to apologize about that.
In today's South Africa, they are scarce in regards to these policies. Families were separated, families were killed, kids died, husbands were confiscated, wives were tortured and assaulted. What is evident is that the Truth and the Reconciliation Commission, constituted by the late President Nelson Mandela under the tutelage of Archbishop the late Desmond Tutu, never really attained its desired output, that is of reconciling South Africans. The bitterness, the envy, the jealousy still pervades Africa's most advanced economy. Whether this will change is a subject that will be debated for years to come. For the Whispers, I am Dennis Savatia.
Freedom!